The first gunshot rang through Silver Creek's dusty Main Street, but it wasn't the sound that froze the blood in Nora Holloway's veins, it was the accusation that followed. Shameless flirt. Mayor Wilkins bellowed, his jowls quivering with rage as he pointed a trembling finger at her, his wife sobbing dramatically beside him. "You've disgraced this town for the last time." Nora stood her ground despite the whispers erupting around her, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. At 22, she'd grown accustomed to the suspicious glares that followed her through town, but never had the accusations been so public, so vicious. "I've done nothing wrong," she declared, her voice stronger than she felt. The crowd that had gathered outside the general store shifted uncomfortably, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in condemnation. It was 1875, and Silver Creek, Colorado was a town clinging to respectability as desperately as it clung to the silver veins in the nearby mountains. For a young woman alone, running the town's only millinery shop since her parents' passing 2 years prior, whispers were as common as tumbleweed. "Nothing wrong," Mrs. Wilkins shrieked. "My husband came home with lipstick on his collar, and half the town saw you batting your eyelashes at him outside your shop yesterday." Nora's cheeks burned. "I sold the mayor a hat for you, madam, as a surprise, that's all." Before Mrs. Wilkins could respond, a deep voice cut through the tension. "Seems to me a woman running her own business shouldn't be punished for being pleasant to her customers." The crowd parted as Quentin Drake dismounted his chestnut stallion, dust from the trail still clinging to his leather vest and denim trousers. Nora recognized him immediately, the new rancher who'd purchased the old Thornhill property outside town 3 months ago. He'd stopped in her shop once for a hat, paid without much conversation, and left. What she remembered most were his eyes, clear blue and direct, like they could see straight through pretense. Mayor Wilkins puffed up his chest. "This isn't your concern, Drake. Miss Holloway has been leading men astray since she took over her parents' shop. Half the married men in town find excuses to visit her establishment." "Perhaps," Quentin said, removing his hat and running a hand through his son's streaked brown hair, "because she's the only milliner in 50 miles. His gaze shifted to Nora, a slight smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Though I can't fault them for appreciating the view while they're there." Nora wasn't sure whether to thank him or scold him for making things worse. Mrs. Wilkins gasped. "You see, she's even bewitched the newcomer." "Madam," Quentin replied, replacing his hat, "I assure you if Miss Holloway were flirting with me, I'd know it, and I'd welcome it." He turned to Nora, his expression suddenly serious. "If they're going to accuse you of shameless flirting anyway, Miss Holloway, you might as well flirt with me until my last day." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Nora stared at him, speechless, heat rising to her cheeks. Sheriff Patterson finally stepped forward, clearly eager to defuse the situation. "All right, folks, show's over. Mayor, take your wife home. Miss Holloway, I suggest you mind your business more carefully. Drake, welcome to town politics." The last part he added with a weary sigh. As the crowd dispersed, Nora hurried back toward her shop, heart hammering. She could feel Quentin Drake's presence behind her before he spoke. "Miss Holloway," he called. "A moment of your time." She paused at her door, key in hand. "Mr. Drake, while I appreciate your intervention, I'm not sure you've helped my reputation." He approached slowly, respectfully keeping a proper distance. "Reputation is a prison, Miss Holloway, especially in towns like this." "Easy for you to say," she replied. "Men are allowed indiscretions. Women are ruined by whispers." "True enough." His eyes met her steadily. "Which is why I'd like to make you a proper business proposal." Nora raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "I've got 20 men at my ranch and not a decent hat among them. They're all wearing rags that barely keep the sun off. With winter coming, they'll need proper headwear. I'd like to place an order." She studied him suspiciously. "You're trying to help me?" "I'm trying to keep my men from getting sunstroke or frostbite, depending on the season." His smile revealed a dimple in his right cheek. "The fact that it might silence some gossip is merely a fortunate coincidence." Nora hesitated, then unlocked her shop door. "You'd better come in, Mr. Drake. We can discuss your order properly." As she entered her shop, the bell above the door tinkling gently, she felt a strange flutter in her chest. Whether from the public confrontation or Quentin Drake's unexpected defense, she couldn't say. But something told her Silver Creek was about to get a lot more interesting. Inside her shop, surrounded by hat stands and bolts of ribbon, Nora regained some of her composure. The familiar scents of felt, straw, and the lavender sachets she tucked into hat boxes calmed her nerves. Quentin Drake looked out of place among the feminine trappings of her store, his broad shoulders and tall frame making the space seem smaller than it was. He removed his hat again, revealing a farmer's tan that marked the line where his hat usually sat. 20 hats is a substantial order, Nora said, moving behind her counter. What sort were you thinking, workday hats or something more refined, practical for daily wear, he replied, though I wouldn't mind something a bit more gentlemanly for myself, for town visits. She pulled out her order book, grateful for the familiar routine. And when would you need these delivered? I can send a wagon for them when they're ready. He leaned against the counter but maintained a respectful distance. Miss Holloway, may I speak plainly? Nora looked up from her book. You don't strike me as a man who speaks any other way, Mr. Drake. That earned her a genuine smile. Fair enough, I meant what I said out there. This town treats you unfairly. The price of independence, she replied, keeping her voice light. My parents left me this shop and the skills to run it. Some folks think a woman of 22 should be married with children by now, not running a business alone. And what do you think? The question caught her off guard. Few people in Silver Creek had ever asked what she wanted. I think, she said carefully, that I'm not opposed to marriage, but I'd need a partner who sees me as an equal, not a possession. That's rare enough that I'm content with my shop for now. Quentin nodded. Rare, but not impossible. He straightened up. I'll need those hats within the month, if possible. My men's current headwear won't survive the first snow. I'll start immediately, Nora said, writing the details in her ledger. Half payment in advance is my usual arrangement. He placed a small pouch on the counter that clinked heavily. Consider that the full amount, any excess, keep as an apology for dragging you into more gossip. Nora pushed the pouch back toward him. Half now, half on delivery. I don't accept charity, Mr. Drake. He studied her for a moment, then took back part of the money. As you wish, Miss Holloway. He moved toward the door, then paused. My offer stands, you know, she blinked in confusion. Your offer to flirt with me instead of these town fools. His eyes held a mischievous glint. At least I'd appreciate it properly. Before she could formulate a response, he was gone, the bell tinkling in his wake. Nora sank onto her stool, heart racing. Quentin Drake was dangerous not in the way of the rough men who sometimes passed through town, but in a way that threatened the careful walls she'd built around herself. She'd need to be on guard. This was just business, she reminded herself. Just a transaction between a milliner and a rancher. But as she began sketching designs for the order, she couldn't help but wonder what it might be like to take him up on his offer. To flirt shamelessly with a man who seemed to see her for who she truly was. Over the next 2 weeks, Nora threw herself into the Drake order, working from dawn until well past dusk. The substantial commission meant she could purchase materials she normally couldn't afford, and the challenge of designing hats suited to working cowboys engaged her creativity in ways that the usual ladies' bonnets didn't. She was so focused on her work that she almost forgot about the incident with Mayor Wilkins until Mrs. Peterson came in for her monthly fitting. You've caused quite the stir, dear, the older woman said as Nora pinned a new feather to her hat. Mrs. Peterson was one of the few townswomen who had always treated Nora kindly, perhaps because her own daughter had defied convention by becoming a schoolteacher in Denver. The mayor's wife still crossing the street to avoid me? Nora asked, keeping her tone light. Oh, she's telling anyone who'll listen that you tried to seduce her husband. Mrs. Peterson waved her hand dismissively, but that's not the interesting gossip, Nora groaned. There's more. It's that handsome Mr. Drake, Mrs. Peterson said, eyes twinkling. He's been asking questions about you all over town. Nora nearly stabbed herself with a hatpin. What kind of questions? Oh, nothing improper, just your history, your parents, how long you've had the shop, but he's been quite thorough. Talked to Reverend Simpson yesterday for nearly an hour. Nora frowned. Why would Quentin Drake be investigating her? The unpleasant thought that he might be like other men interested only in her presumed availability curdled in her stomach. I'm sure it's just business curiosity, she said, more to herself than to Mrs. Peterson. He placed a large order. If you say so, dear. Mrs. Peterson didn't look convinced. Though most men don't need to know if a woman can bake a decent pie before placing a hat order, after Mrs. Peterson left, Nora couldn't concentrate. Her neat stitches became uneven, and she pricked her finger twice. By closing time, she'd made up her mind to confront Quentin Drake about his inquiries. His ranch was too far to visit without raising eyebrows, but she knew from town gossip that he came in every Wednesday for supplies. Sure enough, the following Wednesday, she spotted his distinctive chestnut stallion tied outside the general store. Gathering her courage, she crossed the street, ignoring the curious glances from passers-by. She found him examining a display of work gloves, his back to the door. He sensed her presence almost immediately, turning with a look of pleasant surprise that quickly transformed into concern when he saw her expression. "Miss Holloway," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "is everything all right? May I speak with you privately, Mr. Drake?" She asked, her voice low but firm. He nodded, following her outside and around the corner of the building where they wouldn't be overheard. "I understand you've been asking questions about me," she said without preamble. "I'd appreciate knowing why." If he was embarrassed at being caught, he didn't show it. "I have been," he admitted, "though I meant no disrespect." "Then what did you mean?" she pressed. "What possible business is my pie-baking ability to you?" That brought a flush to his tanned face. Mrs. Peterson has a loose tongue. "Answer the question, Mr. Drake." He leaned against the wall, studying her face. "The truth, then. I was trying to understand why this town is so quick to malign a woman who, by all accounts, is nothing but hardworking and honest." Nora hadn't expected that. And I've concluded it's because you represent something that frightens them: independence, competence, beauty without submission. His gaze was steady. "Three things that make some men very uncomfortable." The compliment warmed her despite her irritation. "That doesn't explain why you needed to know if I can bake." A small smile played at his lips. "That was an offhand question. Mrs. Peterson volunteered that information along with the fact that you make excellent preserves and can shoot a rifle with reasonable accuracy." "My father believed in practical education," Nora said, feeling slightly off balance. "But I still don't understand your interest." Quentin pushed away from the wall, taking a step closer. Not threateningly close, but near enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "I find myself drawn to you, Miss Holloway, not because of town gossip, but despite it. I wanted to know if the woman I've been thinking about matches the woman you truly are." Her heart skipped, and does she? From what I've gathered, she exceeds her in every way. His voice had dropped lower. "I'd like the chance to discover that for myself if you'd permit it." Nora felt breathless. "Mr. Drake, Quentin," he corrected gently. "Quentin," she repeated, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. "I'm flattered, but surely you understand that any association between us would only feed the rumors." "Let them talk," he said with a dismissive shrug. "Unless, is it that you're not interested? If so, I'll trouble you no further." "It's not that," she admitted before she could stop herself. "But my reputation is already the subject of unfair speculation," he finished for her. "At least this way you might enjoy the company that comes with the gossip." A laugh escaped her despite herself. "You're very direct. Life's too short not to be. My father spent 40 years never speaking his mind and died with a lifetime of regrets." His expression grew serious. "I don't intend to make the same mistake." Nora took a deep breath. "The hats will be ready next week. You could come by the shop to inspect them, perhaps stay for tea." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'd like that very much." As they parted ways, Nora felt a dizzying mixture of anticipation and trepidation. She was playing with fire and she knew it. But for the first time since her parents' passing, the warmth was welcome. True to her word, Nora completed the order for Drake Ranch by the following Wednesday. 20 sturdy, practical hats for the ranch hands and one finer Stetson for Quentin himself. She'd taken extra care with his, adding a subtle band of tooled leather that complemented the deep brown of the felt. When the bell above her door rang at precisely 4 o'clock, she was ready with tea set out on the small table in the back room where she usually took her meals. Quentin ducked through the doorway, removing his hat immediately. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His shirt was crisp, his hair neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard to a clean edge. "Miss Holloway," he greeted her, then smiled. "Nora, if I may be so bold." "You may," she replied, finding it easier than expected to return his smile. "The hats are ready for your inspection." He glanced at the neatly wrapped packages but seemed more interested in her than his purchase. "I'm sure they are perfect. You haven't even looked at them," she chided. "I trust your craftsmanship." His eyes held hers, "but I'll examine them if it makes you feel better." She led him to the counter where she'd displayed the various styles. He made a show of inspecting them, asking intelligent questions about the materials and construction that told her he knew more about hat making than the average rancher. When he came to his own hat, he whistled softly. "This is fine work, Nora, too fine for a simple rancher." "You're hardly simple," she replied, then blushed at how the words sounded. He tried the hat on, and it fit perfectly, as she knew it would. She'd secretly measured his old one when he'd left it on her counter during his first visit. "How do I look?" he asked, striking a pose that made her laugh. "Like a man who knows the value of a good hat," she answered. "Tea." They moved to the back room, where the small table made for an intimate setting. As Nora poured, she noticed his eyes taking in the modest space, the narrow bed behind a screen, the tiny stove, the bookshelf crammed with volumes. "You live here?" he asked. She nodded. "The shop was my parents' dream. When they died, I sold our house to keep it running. This space is enough for me. It's cozy," he said, clearly choosing his words carefully. "It's small," she corrected with a smile, "but it's mine. No landlord to answer to, no one to tell me how to live." "Freedom has value beyond measure," he agreed, accepting the cup she offered. "My ranch isn't much more spacious, truth be told. The main house needs work." "The Thornhill place was falling apart when old Mr. Thornhill was still alive," Nora said. "I'm surprised you took it on. The land is good. The buildings can be fixed." He sipped his tea. "I've always believed in seeing potential where others see ruin." The conversation flowed easily after that. Quentin told her about growing up in Texas, his time riding with a cattle outfit, and his dream of building something lasting. Nora shared stories of learning millinery from her mother, of her father's encouragement to be independent, of her hopes to expand the shop someday. Before they realized it, dusk had fallen, the light fading from the windows. "I've kept you too long," Quentin said, rising reluctantly. "Not at all," Nora assured him. "It's been pleasant." "Pleasant," he repeated, a hint of teasing in his voice. "High praise indeed. Very pleasant," she amended, smiling. He gathered his hat, the new one, and moved toward the door. "When might I call on you again, properly, I mean?" "Not just for business." Nora hesitated only briefly. "Sunday after church, I'll be here." He paused at the door. "And Nora, thank you for taking a chance on a nosy rancher." After he left, Nora sat alone in her shop, touching the teacup he had used, wondering what she had just set in motion. Whatever came next, she knew her life had shifted, like the ground during a tremor, subtle but irrevocable. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. News traveled quickly in Silver Creek. By Sunday morning, it seemed everyone knew that Quentin Drake would be calling on Nora Holloway after services. The glances during the sermon ranged from curious to disapproving. But for once, Nora found she didn't care. She'd chosen her dress carefully, a blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, with a modest neckline but a cut that flattered her figure. Her honey blonde hair was arranged in a simple but elegant knot at the nape of her neck. As the congregation filed out of the church, Reverend Simpson stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Miss Holloway," he said quietly, "a word." Expecting a lecture, she was surprised by the warmth in his eyes. "Mr. Drake spoke to me at length last week," the Reverend said. He's a good man with honorable intentions. I'm pleased to see you giving him a chance." Relief washed over her. The Reverend's approval would go a long way in softening the town's judgment. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "That means a great deal." Outside, Quentin waited by the steps, wearing his new hat and a suit that, while not new, had been carefully pressed. When he saw her, his face brightened in a way that made several nearby ladies sigh audibly. "Miss Holloway," he greeted her formally, offering his arm, "may I escort you to lunch? I've taken the liberty of arranging a picnic, if that suits you." "That sounds lovely, Mr. Drake," she replied, placing her hand on his arm and feeling the solid strength beneath the wool of his jacket. He led her to a waiting buggy, helping her up with a gentle hand at her waist that lingered just a moment longer than strictly necessary. As they drove out of town, Nora was acutely aware of the eyes following them, but found herself caring less with each passing minute. Quentin drove them to a meadow beside Silver Creek itself, where the water burbled peacefully over smooth stones and cottonwood trees provided dappled shade. He'd prepared thoroughly, a blanket was spread on the grass and a proper picnic basket waited. "How did you manage all this?" Nora asked as he helped her from the buggy. "I have my resources," he replied mysteriously, then grinned. "Mrs. Leary at the hotel owed me a favor. She packed enough food for 10 people, I think." The meal was indeed generous: fried chicken, biscuits, apple preserves, and a bottle of sweet cider. They ate comfortably, talking easily about everything and nothing, laughing more than Nora had in years. "Tell me something no one else in Silver Creek knows about you," Quentin said as they finished the meal, both leaning back on their elbows on the blanket. Nora considered the question. "I dream of Paris," she admitted. "My mother had a book of French fashions. I used to imagine designing hats for the ladies there, walking along the Seine, seeing the world." "Why don't you go?" he asked, his tone genuinely curious. "Money, responsibility, fear," she listed, then shrugged. "The usual anchors. Dreams shouldn't be anchors," he said quietly. "They should be sails." She turned to look at him, struck by the poetry of his words. "What about you? What does Quentin Drake dream of that Silver Creek doesn't know?" He was silent a moment, his gaze on the flowing creek. "Peace," he finally said. "I've spent most of my life moving, searching. I want to build something that lasts, put down roots so deep they can't be torn up." "Is that why you bought the ranch?" "Part of it." He turned to face her, suddenly serious. "The other part I'm still working on." The intensity in his eyes made her heart flutter. "And what's that?" "Finding someone to share it with." His hand moved closer to hers on the blanket, not quite touching. "Someone who understands that dreams and roots aren't contradictions." Nora's breath caught. They'd known each other barely a month, yet she felt he understood her better than people she'd known all her life. "That's a tall order," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "I'm a patient man." His fingers brushed hers, the touch sending warmth up her arm. "When something's worth waiting for." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then, with careful deliberation, Quentin leaned closer. Nora held perfectly still as his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it might have been the brush of a butterfly's wing. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers for any sign of regret or discomfort. Finding none, he smiled, a slow, perfect curve of his lips that made her want to trace it with her fingertip. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you standing up to the whole town," he confessed. "I'm glad you waited until now," she replied. "It was worth it." They returned to town as the sun began its descent, both knowing that whatever happened next, there would be no going back to being merely acquaintances. The course was set, the journey begun. As summer yielded to autumn, Quentin became a regular visitor at Nora's shop. Sometimes he brought small gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry, once a bolt of imported silk he'd commissioned from Denver. Other times, he simply came to sit with her as she worked, talking about his progress on the ranch or listening to her ideas for new designs. The town's attitude gradually shifted as it became clear that Quentin's intentions were serious and honorable. Mrs. Wilkins still sniffed disapprovingly when Nora passed, but others who had once shunned her now nodded in greeting. Being courted by one of the area's most eligible bachelors had granted her a respectability that her independence alone had denied her. Not that the courtship was without its challenges. One evening in late September, as they walked along the main street after dinner at the hotel, they encountered Sheriff Patterson looking grim. "Evening, Drake, Miss Holloway," he greeted them, tipping his hat. "Hate to interrupt your stroll, but I've got news you should hear, Drake. Rustlers hit the Simmons place last night, took nearly 20 head." Quentin's posture stiffened. "Anyone hurt?" "Simmons took a bullet in the shoulder when he tried to stop them. He'll live, but he's laid up. Doc says he won't be working that ranch for a while." "What about the rustlers?" "Tracked them as far as Broken Ridge, then lost the trail." The sheriff shook his head. "I'd keep an eye on your herd, Drake. These men know what they're doing." After the sheriff moved on, Nora noticed the change in Quentin's demeanor. His jaw was set, his eyes scanning the darkening street as if expecting danger. "Are you worried?" she asked quietly. "Cautious," he corrected. "The ranch is remote, and I don't have enough men to watch the whole property." She touched his arm. "What will you do?" "Double the night patrols, bring the most valuable stock closer to the main house." He covered her hand with his own. "Don't worry, this isn't my first encounter with rustlers." But as they continued their walk, Nora could feel the new tension in him. The carefree quality of their evening had vanished, replaced by a vigilance that reminded her that life in the West still carried dangers beyond social disapproval. When he left her at her shop door, his kiss was distracted, his mind clearly already at his ranch. "Be careful," she said, holding his hand a moment longer. His focus returned to her, his expression softening. "Always. I've got too much to look forward to now." For the next 2 weeks, Quentin's visits became less frequent as he dealt with securing his property. When he did come to town, there were new lines of worry around his eyes, though he tried to mask them with smiles. Then came the night that changed everything. Nora was awakened just after midnight by pounding on her shop door. Grabbing her robe and a small pistol her father had given her, she approached cautiously. "Who's there?" she called. "Nora, it's me," came Quentin's voice, strained in a way she'd never heard before. "Please open up." She unlocked the door immediately. Quentin stumbled in, supporting a young man she recognized as one of his ranch hands. The boy couldn't have been more than 19, and blood soaked the right side of his shirt. "Jamie took a bullet," Quentin explained tersely. "Doc Sullivan's out delivering the Peterson baby. Can you help?" "Bring him back," Nora directed, her fear giving way to practical action. "I'll heat water." They laid the injured boy on her bed. Nora quickly gathered clean cloths, her sewing kit, and the bottle of whiskey she kept for medicinal purposes. "What happened?" she asked as she cut away the blood-soaked shirt. "Rustlers," Quentin said grimly. 6 of them hit the south pasture. Jamie and I were on patrol. They got him before we even knew they were there. The wound was a clean through and through in the shoulder, missing any vital organs but bleeding heavily. Nora cleaned it as best she could, then looked at Quentin. "I need to stitch this. I've done it before. My father had a similar wound once, but it will hurt him." "Do it," Quentin said, then turned to the boy. "Jamie, Miss Holloway's going to fix you up, but it's going to sting worse than your mama's switch. You understand?" The boy nodded weakly. Quentin held him down as Nora poured whiskey over the wound, causing Jamie to buck and cry out. Then, with steady hands that belied her racing heart, she began to stitch the torn flesh. By the time she finished, Jamie had passed out from the pain, which was a mercy. Nora bandaged the wound tightly, then collapsed into the chair beside the bed. Suddenly aware that her hands were covered in blood and trembling violently, Quentin knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "You did well," he said softly. "Better than most doctors I've seen. Will they come back?" She whispered, "The rustlers," his expression darkened. "Not if I find them first." "Quentin," she gripped his hands harder. "Don't let the sheriff handle it. Patterson's a good man, but he's one lawman for a county bigger than some states." He stood, his decision clearly made. "Jamie will need tending for a few days. Can he stay here?" "Of course, but I'll send one of my men to help you tomorrow." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Thank you, Nora, for everything." Before she could protest further, he was gone, the shop door closing behind him with a finality that chilled her to the bone. For 3 days, Nora cared for Jamie while running her shop, working herself to exhaustion. True to his word, Quentin had sent a ranch hand to help a quiet, older man named Eduardo who slept on her floor and took over watching Jamie when she needed to work. There was no word from Quentin himself. On the fourth day, Sheriff Patterson came to her shop, his expression grave. "Miss Holloway," he said, removing his hat. "I thought you should know, there was a shootout at Broken Ridge yesterday. Drake and 2 of his men tracked the rustlers to their camp." Nora's heart seemed to stop. He's alive," Patterson assured her quickly. "2 of the rustlers are dead, 1 wounded and in my jail. The other 3 escaped. And Quentin," she pressed, needing to know, "took a bullet to the leg, nothing life-threatening, but he lost blood. He's at his ranch, refused to come to town for the doctor." The sheriff shook his head. "Stubborn fool said he didn't want to worry you." "Didn't want to," Nora cut herself off, anger and relief warring within her. "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff." As soon as he left, Nora turned to Eduardo. "Can you manage Jamie alone for a day?" The old cowboy nodded. "The boy's doing well." "You go see the boss." It took Nora less than an hour to arrange transportation to the Drake Ranch. Mr. Leary from the hotel lent her his buckboard, and by early afternoon, she was driving through the gates of what would have been a grand property in its prime. The main house was a 2-story structure that had clearly seen better days, though she could see signs of recent repairs. A bunkhouse and several outbuildings completed the central compound, with corrals and a barn nearby. A ranch hand spotted her approach and came running to meet her. "Miss Holloway, the boss said you might come. He's inside." She found Quentin in what must have been the study, his leg propped on a footstool, a blood-stained bandage visible beneath hastily cut trouser fabric. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "Nora," he started, attempting to rise. "Don't you dare get up," she said firmly, setting down the basket of supplies she'd brought. "Of all the foolish, reckless—" "I'm fine," he insisted. "You were shot." She knelt beside him, examining the crude bandaging. "This needs proper cleaning and dressing." He had the good sense not to argue as she unwrapped the wound. It was an ugly gash where a bullet had torn along his outer thigh, but it was already beginning to heal. Still, the risk of infection was real. As she cleaned and rebandaged it properly, her anger gradually gave way to relief that he was, indeed, going to be all right. "I was worried," she admitted quietly as she tied off the bandage. "I didn't want you to be," he replied, his hand finding hers. "That's why I stayed away." "That's not how this works, Quentin." She looked up at him, suddenly needing him to understand. "If we're to have any future together, you don't get to decide when to shut me out, not for my protection, not for any reason." He stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Any future together? Nora realized what she'd revealed and blushed, but didn't retract the words. "Yes, if that's still what you want." Quentin pulled her closer until she was perched on the edge of his chair. "Nora Holloway, that's all I've wanted since the day I saw you standing up to the entire town. I just wasn't sure you felt the same." "I do," she whispered. "But I need a partner, Quentin, not a protector. You'll have both," he promised. "Because sometimes this life does require protection. But never at the cost of partnership." He touched her face gently. "I'm sorry I didn't come to you. I was afraid." "Of what?" His voice dropped lower. "That seeing me wounded might make you reconsider a life with me, the dangers that come with it." Nora laughed softly. "I just stitched up your ranch hand in my shop at midnight. I think I understand the dangers." She leaned closer. "And I'm still here." His kiss was different this time, deeper, more urgent, as if her words had unleashed something he'd been holding back. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he murmured. "Not just today. Stay with me, Nora. Be my wife." The proposal was sudden and unplanned, yet it felt perfectly right. "Are you asking because you're bedridden and need a nurse?" She teased, even as tears pricked her eyes. "I'm asking because I love you," he said simply, "and because I never want to face another day without knowing you'll be part of it." Nora's heart swelled until she thought it might burst from joy. "Then yes," she answered, "I'll stay. Today and all the days after." As winter settled over Silver Creek, the town buzzed with news of the upcoming wedding. Nora continued working at her shop but spent weekends at the ranch, helping Quentin restore the main house to its former glory. Together they selected furnishings, repaired the sagging porch, and planned for the future, Jamie recovered fully and became one of their most loyal hands, fiercely protective of Miss Nora, as he called her. The rustlers who had escaped were eventually caught by a U.S. Marshal in New Mexico, bringing a sense of security back to the area's ranchers. The wedding was set for Christmas Eve, a time Nora had always loved. Reverend Simpson would perform the ceremony in the town church, followed by a celebration at the hotel that promised to be the social event of the season. As the day approached, Nora found herself increasingly reflective about how much her life had changed. 1 year ago, she had been the subject of whispers and judgment. Now she was preparing to marry a man who had defended her honor before he even knew her name. The night before the wedding, she closed her shop early and was surprised to find Mrs. Wilkins waiting outside, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Mrs. Wilkins," Nora greeted her cautiously. "Can I help you?" The older woman clutched her purse tightly. "I've come to apologize, Miss Holloway." Of all the things Nora had expected, an apology wasn't among them. "I beg your pardon, I was wrong about you," Mrs. Wilkins continued, her voice strained but determined. "My husband, he wasn't visiting your shop for hats. He was meeting Sarah Miller at the saloon and using your shop as an excuse." Nora had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed brought a strange sense of vindication. "I'm sorry for your troubles, Mrs. Wilkins." "No, I'm the one who's sorry. I blamed you publicly, ruined your reputation." She looked genuinely remorseful. "And now you're marrying the finest man in the county while my husband's run off with a saloon girl half his age." Nora wasn't sure how to respond. Part of her wanted to savor the moment, but a larger part recognized the pain behind the woman's words. "Life has a way of sorting itself out, Mrs. Wilkins," she said finally. "I hold no ill will toward you." The woman looked up, surprised. "You're a better person than I gave you credit for, Miss Holloway." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small package, a wedding gift. "It's not much, but—" Nora accepted it with genuine gratitude. "You'll come tomorrow, to the church," Mrs. Wilkins nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'd be honored." After she left, Nora opened the package to find a delicate lace handkerchief with her soon-to-be initials ND embroidered in the corner. It was a peace offering, a symbol of how much had changed. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the town in pristine white. Nora dressed in her shop with the help of Mrs. Peterson and 2 other ladies who had become friends in recent months. Her gown was simple but elegant ivory satin with a lace overlay that she'd worked on in secret moments between hat commissions. "You look radiant, dear," Mrs. Peterson said, adjusting the small circlet of holly berries that served as Nora's headpiece. "I feel like I'm dreaming," Nora admitted. "A year ago, I never imagined this." "Life has a way of surprising us," Mrs. Peterson said, echoing Nora's words to Mrs. Wilkins, "especially when we're brave enough to follow our hearts." The church was filled to capacity when Nora arrived. She'd worried that walking down the aisle alone might feel awkward, but Sheriff Patterson had offered to escort her, a gesture that touched her deeply. As the music began and she took her first steps toward the altar, Nora saw only Quentin. He stood tall and straight, his injured leg fully healed, wearing a new suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. But it was his expression that captured her, a look of such unguarded joy and love that she felt tears spring to her eyes. When she reached him, he took her hands in his eyes never leaving hers. "You're beautiful," he whispered. Reverend Simpson's words washed over her as she stood there, promising to love and honor the man before her. When it came time for Quentin's vows, he spoke with a conviction that resonated through the church. "Nora Holloway, I take you as my wife, promising to stand beside you, not before you or behind you, for all the days of my life. I vow to be your partner in all things, to cherish your independence as much as I cherish you. And I promise to give you reasons to flirt shamelessly with me until my last day on this earth." A ripple of laughter moved through the congregation at his final words, a reference to their first meeting that only a few understood. Nora's heart swelled as she repeated her own vows, sealing them with a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership. The celebration afterward was everything a country wedding should be: abundant food, music from local fiddlers, dancing that continued well into the night. Nora danced with her new husband, with Sheriff Patterson, with Jamie, who blushed furiously, and with several other ranch hands who had become like family. As midnight approached, Quentin pulled her away from the crowd, leading her outside where his sleigh waited, decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Drake?" he asked, his voice warm in the cold night air. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word. "I like the sound of that." He helped her into the sleigh, tucking blankets around her before climbing in beside her. As they drove away from town, bells jingling merrily, Nora leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Do you remember what you said the day we met?" she asked. "About flirting with you until your last day," he chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her cheek. "I remember everything about that day." "I was thinking," she continued, sliding her hand into his, "that might be the easiest promise I ever keep." Quentin's arm tightened around her. "Is that so, she confirmed. "In fact, I plan to start tonight." His laugh echoed across the snow-covered fields as he urged the horses to a faster pace, carrying them toward their future, a future built on mutual respect, partnership, and a love that had defied convention from the very beginning. Spring came early to Silver Creek in 1876. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots pushing through the soil, much like the new life Nora and Quentin were building together. The ranch flourished under their joint care. Nora had moved her millinery business to a converted room in the main house, where ladies from the surrounding area would come for fittings. What had begun as a necessity had become a status symbol. Having a Nora Drake original was now a mark of distinction among the county's society women. Quentin had expanded the ranch's operations, adding sheep to the cattle and horses they already raised. It had been Nora's suggestion the wool would give them income even in years when cattle prices fell, and she could use some of the finest fleeces for felting her most expensive hats. Their partnership extended to all aspects of ranch life. While Quentin handled most of the physical work with his men, Nora managed the accounts with a precision that had doubled their profits in the first 6 months. They made decisions together, respecting each other's expertise and instincts. It wasn't always easy. They had disagreements, sometimes heated ones, about everything from breeding stock to which rooms to renovate first. But they had established one unbreakable rule: never go to bed angry. No matter how late the hour, they would talk through their differences until understanding, if not agreement, was reached. On a warm evening in late April, they sat on the newly rebuilt porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and pink. Nora leaned against the porch railing, wearing a simple dress with her hair loose around her shoulders, a luxury she allowed herself only at home. "I had a letter from Mrs. Peterson today," she said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Her daughter's expecting their first child in September." Quentin nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Good news. Ellen's been married, 2 years now, nearly 3. Nora hesitated, then added casually, "She asked when we might be making a similar announcement." His gaze shifted to her, suddenly intent. Did she now? Nora felt her cheeks warm under his scrutiny. "It's a natural question, I suppose." Quentin set aside his coffee cup and moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling evening air. "And what did you tell her?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Nora took a deep breath. "I told her that some announcements come sooner than expected." For a moment he didn't seem to understand, then his eyes widened, dropping to her still flat stomach before returning to her face. "Nora," he breathed, "are you saying?" She nodded, suddenly nervous. They hadn't explicitly discussed children, though both had mentioned wanting a family someday. "The baby should arrive in November," she said. "I've suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to be sure before I told you." Quentin's response was everything she could have hoped for. A brilliant smile broke across his face, and in one fluid motion he lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle that made her laugh with surprised delight. "Careful," she protested through her giggles. "I'm in a delicate condition, or so Mrs. Sullivan tells me." He set her down immediately but kept his arms around her. "Are you feeling well? Do you need anything? Should you be working so much?" The questions tumbled out, his protective instincts in full force. "I'm perfectly fine," she assured him, touching his face gently. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, most of them while working far harder than I do. But not my wife, not carrying my child." His hand moved to rest reverently over her abdomen. "Our child." The wonder in his voice made her eyes sting with tears. "Are you happy then?" Happy doesn't begin to describe it. He kissed her, a tender kiss that conveyed all the emotions words couldn't express. When he pulled back, there was a suspicious brightness in his own eyes. "I love you, Nora Drake, more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she whispered against his lips. "Always." As summer progressed, Nora's condition became more apparent, though she continued working at a slightly reduced pace. Quentin watched over her with a mixture of pride and concern that amused the ranch hands to no end. "Boss nearly took my head off when I let you lift that bolt of fabric yesterday," Jamie confided one afternoon as he helped her arrange a display of summer bonnets. The young man had become something of an assistant to her, showing a surprising eye for design. "He means well," Nora said fondly. "Though if he tries to carry me up the stairs one more time, I may have to remind him who manages the household accounts." Jamie grinned. "You'd never cut off his funds, Miss Nora." "No," she agreed with a laugh, "but he doesn't need to know that." Their easy banter was interrupted by the arrival of a rider, dust-covered and urgent. Nora recognized him as one of the hands from the Peterson ranch. "Mrs. Drake," he called, dismounting hastily. "Is the boss around? There's trouble." Quentin appeared from the barn, alerted by the rider's approach. "What's happened, Tom?" "Fire, sir. Lightning struck the East Range last night. It's spreading fast toward your property line. Mr. Peterson sent riders to all the neighboring ranches. He's asking for men to help build a firebreak." Quentin's expression darkened. "How bad?" "Bad enough. The wind's pushing it this way." Tom glanced nervously at Nora. "Sorry to bring such news, madam." Quentin was already shouting orders, calling for horses to be saddled and tools loaded. Within minutes, most of the ranch hands were mounted and ready, waiting for his instructions. He came to Nora last, his face grim but composed. "I have to go." "I know," she said, refusing to show the fear that gripped her at the thought of him riding toward a wildfire. "Be careful." "I'll have Eduardo and Jamie stay behind," he told her, already checking his gear. "Keep the house safe," she touched his arm. "I can manage the house. Take Jamie, you'll need every hand. Eduardo is enough." He hesitated, then nodded sharply. "We'll be back as soon as we can. If the wind shifts and the fire changes direction, I'll load what matters in the wagon and head to town," she finished for him. "I know what to do, Quentin." He kissed her quickly, then mounted his horse. As the group of men rode out, dust billowing behind them, Nora said a silent prayer for their safe return. The hours that followed were some of the longest of her life. From the upstairs window, she could see the distant smoke, a dark smudge against the blue summer sky that seemed to grow larger as the day progressed. Eduardo patrolled the property line, coming back periodically to report what he could see. By nightfall, the sky to the east glowed an ominous orange. Nora had packed essential items, documents, valuables, medicines, and hitched the wagon just in case. But leaving the home she and Quentin had built together was unthinkable unless absolutely necessary. She was standing on the porch, watching the distant glow when Eduardo came running from the barn. "Riders coming," he said, his weathered hand resting on his pistol. "Not ours." Nora reached for the shotgun she'd kept by the door, her heart pounding. How many? 3, maybe 4, moving fast. They waited in tense silence as the riders approached. When they came into view in the moonlight, Nora felt a jolt of recognition. "It's the Wilkins boy," she said, lowering her weapon slightly, "and some others from town." Young Robert Wilkins, no more than 16, reined in his horse sharply. "Mrs. Drake, Sheriff Patterson sent us. The fires jumped the firebreak they built. He said to tell you it's heading this way fast." Nora's blood ran cold. "My husband, the other men, they're trying to build another line, but the sheriff said to get you to town now. There's no time to waste." Eduardo was already moving toward the barn. I'll get the horses, Mrs. Drake. Nora hesitated only briefly before making her decision. Robert, you and your friends help Eduardo with the livestock. Get as many as you can to the south pasture by the creek. I'll finish loading the wagon. The boys dismounted, eager to help. As they worked frantically in the growing darkness, Nora could smell smoke on the strengthening wind, no longer a distant threat, but an immediate danger. She had just secured the last crate in the wagon when a new sound reached her hoofbeats, many of them approaching fast from the east. Her heart leapt with hope that it might be Quentin and the others returning, but Eduardo's shout from the corral dashed that hope. Fires coming over the ridge. We need to go now. In the distance, Nora could see a line of flame cresting the eastern hills, moving faster than she would have believed possible. The wind that had been their enemy all day was now driving the fire directly toward the ranch. She climbed onto the wagon seat, gathering the reins with hands that remained surprisingly steady. Eduardo and the boys had managed to drive about 30 head of cattle and a dozen horses toward the creek, but there was no time for more. As they fled west, away from the advancing flames, Nora couldn't help looking back at the home that might soon be reduced to ashes. The thought of Quentin somewhere out there, perhaps trapped between fire lines, made her stomach clench with fear. They reached town shortly after midnight, joining other families who had been evacuated from outlying ranches. Sheriff Patterson had organized a makeshift camp in the town square, where women were distributing food and blankets to the displaced. Mrs. Drake, the sheriff greeted her, his face streaked with soot. Glad you made it, my husband, she asked immediately. Last I saw, he and Peterson were trying to divert the fire away from both your properties. The sheriff's expression was grim but determined. Drake's a smart man, Mrs. Drake. He won't take unnecessary risks. But they both knew that in a wildfire, sometimes there was no safe choice. Dawn broke with no word from the firefighters. The smoke had thickened overnight, casting a strange twilight over the town despite the rising sun. Nora had not slept, spending the night helping tend to children and elderly who had been evacuated, keeping her hands and mind occupied to prevent them from dwelling on darker possibilities. It was mid-morning when the first riders appeared through the smoke-hazed street. Exhausted men on equally exhausted horses, their faces blackened, clothes singed. Nora scanned them desperately, looking for Quentin's familiar figure. Jamie was among the first group, sliding from his saddle with a groan of fatigue. When he saw Nora, relief washed over his smoke-stained face. Miss Nora, you got out in time. Jamie, she gripped his arm. Where is he? The young man swallowed hard. He was with the last group, helping Peterson get his family out. Their place was right in the path. He trailed off, looking back toward the edge of town. Nora followed his gaze and saw more riders emerging from the smoke. Her heart leapt when she recognized Quentin's chestnut stallion, then plummeted when she realized another man was riding it, leading a second horse that carried what appeared to be a body draped over the saddle. Time seemed to slow as the riders approached. Nora couldn't move, couldn't breathe, her entire being focused on that still form. Then the second horse came closer, and the body raised its head weakly. Quentin, alive but clearly injured, managed to lift a hand in greeting before nearly sliding from the saddle. Nora was running before she realized it, reaching him as several men lifted him carefully to the ground. His clothes were burned in places, his face blistered on one side, but his eyes found hers with perfect clarity. The ranch, he rasped, his voice smoke-damaged. I don't know, she admitted, tears finally spilling over. It doesn't matter, you're alive. He managed a pained smile. Told you I'd come back. The fire burned for 3 more days before a providential rainstorm finally extinguished the last flames. The toll was heavy. 2 men lost, several more injured, thousands of acres of grazing land destroyed, and at least 4 ranches burned to the ground. The Drake Ranch, by some miracle of wind direction and the natural fire break provided by the creek, had survived. The eastern pastures were charred wasteland, and they had lost perhaps 1/3 of their cattle, but the main house and buildings stood intact. Quentin's injuries, while painful, were not life-threatening. Burns on his arm and side, smoke inhalation that left him with a persistent cough, and exhaustion that kept him bedridden for nearly a week. Nora tended him with the same gentle efficiency she had shown with Jamie months earlier, applying salves to his burns and brewing teas for his damaged lungs. "I thought I'd lost you," she confessed one evening as she changed his bandages. "When I saw you draped over that horse." "Takes more than a wildfire to keep me from coming home to you," he replied, catching her hand and pressing it to his lips. "Both of you." His free hand moved to her growing belly, where their child had begun to make its presence known with gentle movements. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice stronger than it had been since the fire. "About names." Nora smiled, grateful for this normal conversation after so much fear and uncertainty. "Have you now? If it's a boy, I thought perhaps Thomas, after my father." He watched her face for a reaction. "And if it's a girl, Hope." "Hope," she repeated softly, considering it, "because she'll be born after we've weathered the fire." "Because hope is what I found the day I met you," he corrected, standing up to the entire town, refusing to be cowed by their judgment. "You gave me hope that there were still women like you in the world, brave, independent, true." Nora blinked back tears. Even after months of marriage, he still found ways to touch her heart unexpectedly. "Hope Drake," she said, testing the name. "It's perfect." As summer faded into fall, the land began to recover from the fire's devastation. New grass sprouted in the burned areas, and with careful management, the ranch's remaining livestock thrived. Nora's business continued to grow, with orders coming from as far away as Denver now that her reputation had spread. Their child grew too. Nora's slender frame now decidedly rounded as November approached. Quentin had recovered fully from his injuries, though a patch of scarred skin on his arm would always remain as a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. The night their daughter was born, the first snow of winter was falling, covering the last visible scars of the summer's fire with a clean white blanket. Hope Amelia Drake entered the world after a long labor, her lusty cries filling the bedroom where both she and her mother had been brought into the world. Quentin, who had paced outside until the midwife finally allowed him in, approached the bed with reverence. Nora, exhausted but radiant, held out the small bundle. "Your daughter, Mr. Drake," she said softly. "Hope." He took the infant with hands that trembled slightly, cradling her as if she were made of the finest porcelain. When Hope opened, her eyes blue like his, but shaped like Nora's, and seemed to look directly at him, his composure finally broke. "She's perfect," he whispered, a tear tracking down his cheek, "just like her mother." That night, as snow continued to fall outside their window, the three of them formed a tableau of everything Nora had once thought beyond her reach: a loving husband, a child of her own, a home built on mutual respect and partnership. As Hope slept in the cradle Quentin had crafted by hand, he lay beside Nora, his arm carefully around her still tender body. "Do you remember what I said to you the day we met?" he asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "You said many things that day," she replied sleepily. "Most of them quite scandalous," he chuckled. "I told you to flirt with me until my last day, I remember. I was thinking," he continued, his fingers gently stroking her hair, "that watching you with our daughter today might be the most beautiful flirtation yet." Nora smiled against his chest. "How so?" "Because seeing you as a mother makes me fall in love with you all over again." He kissed the top of her head. "And I suspect that will happen every day for the rest of our lives." "Then I'd better keep practicing my shameless flirting," she murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "I have a reputation to maintain, after all." His soft laughter was the last sound she heard as she fell asleep, secure in the knowledge that the life they had built together, once as improbable as snow in summer, was stronger than any fire, any judgment, any obstacle that might come their way. In the years that followed, the story of how they met became a favorite family tale, told and retold until it gained the polish of legend. How a woman accused of shameless flirting had found her perfect match in a cowboy who had loved her exactly as she was, independent spirit, successful business and all. And if the ladies of Silver Creek still sometimes whispered when Nora Drake entered a room, it was no longer with condemnation, but with envy of a woman who had defied convention and found happiness on her own terms, flirting shamelessly with her husband until the end of their days.